A reading from Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs."
Years ago, I read a story about a group of teenage boys who formed an unlikely pact with one another. The year was 1976. 17 high school seniors, mostly teammates on the varsity football team, were about to graduate, soon to be scattered to the winds. Some would head off to college, others to military duty or local jobs. As this chapter in their lives was about to close, and fearing they might eventually lose touch with each other, they made a pact, all 17 of them. Every Thanksgiving for the rest of their lives, they would meet on their high school football field to play a game of touch football. They persuaded a parent to buy them a bottle of champagne. They tore off the label and affixed their pledge to the bottle. They would play football every year until mortality reduced their group of 17 to just one. And the last man alive on Thanksgiving Day would finally pop the cork on the champagne and toast the other 16. They called themselves the Last Man Society, and 48 years later, they still meet on a football field in Southern California for their annual Turkey Bowl. They're now in their mid-60s. Some come as far away as New York, Minnesota, Atlanta. Some are real estate moguls, some mechanics, some corporate executives. Every Thanksgiving, they bring to the field that unopened bottle of champagne and a firebox containing letters that they've written each other, along with photographs and newspaper clippings and personal histories of each man, all of which will remain sealed as long as they are alive. And should one of them die, the others will open his letters and celebrate his life. Each year after the game, the bottle of champagne is safely tucked away until they meet again the following year. Because they were teenagers at the time, it didn't occur to any of them that maybe wine would have been a better choice for their lifetime pact. In fact, as one of them said, the guy who opens this bottle of champagne someday is going to die drinking it. It's rare for humans, let alone teenagers, to be so mindful of their mortality, to have such an awareness of the impermanence of life, that they would commit themselves to honoring their circle of friendship above all else, knowing that they wouldn't have each other forever. How many times have we heard the cliches? Seize the day, live each day as if it's your last. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. They look great on bumper stickers and motivational posters, but do any of us really live as if they're true? We figure that if we don't seize today, there's always tomorrow, right? So lighten up a little, relax. And does anyone really think this day will be our last? According to the actuarial tables, our life insurance companies do not seem to think so, and we still all buy green bananas, right? And if we happen to forget to gather our rosebuds today, no problem. They're $14.99 a dozen at King Soopers. We always have options. In other words, we've got all the time in the world. None of us, none of this is going anywhere. But there are hints, allusions, even shouts throughout Scripture that seem to tell us otherwise. Teach us to count our days, says Psalm 90, so we may have a wise heart. Does that mean we should count the number of days we've been alive? If so, I'm in for 20,542 days so far. But why don't I feel any wiser for having this information? Is it perhaps because a wise heart is really gained by reflecting on how much time we might have left and then counting those days? Have you ever counted those days? If not, there's actually a website that will count them for you. All you have to do is input your date of birth, your diet and exercise scores. You select your outlook on life from a range of options, and barring any unforeseen events or circumstances, you can ballpark about how much time you probably have left, best based on the averages. I actually tried it this week just out of curiosity, and I'm not bragging or anything, but I have 10,622 days left on my odometer. This website will even give you your, how should we put it, expiration date. And you'll be happy to know that mine will be on a Friday, which is my day off, so it will in no way interfere with my work schedule. If we don't laugh about these things, we'll die from worrying about them. Because even though the psalmist says that knowledge of or impermanence is the beginning of wisdom, we know it's also the cause of so much fear. The psalmist says, you sweep humans away like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it thrives, renewed, but come evening, it withers all dried up. I no less than you wish this were not so. The time between morning and evening for all of us is so brief. The psalmist knows that his life, like every created thing, has a beginning and an end. There is no infinite supply of tomorrows. It's all swept away like a dream someday, and so we count our days. For those of us who live in relative peace and prosperity, with little to fear or worry about compared to maybe those in Ukraine or Gaza or Haiti or the Sudan, all this talk about our impermanence, it seems so unnecessary and depressing, right? But much of the biblical worldview was influenced profoundly by war and violence, suffering and hardship, senseless tragedy. From the very beginning, the Jewish people understood that life was temporal and fragile, that survival was constant struggle, that nothing was guaranteed or permanent. And it was out of that historical milieu of adversity and instability and vulnerability that Jesus came. And Jesus knew the Hebrew Scriptures and all the ancient stories of his people's suffering. He had experienced life under Roman occupation. He'd witnessed firsthand the brutality of oppression. It all gave him a unique view of time that was very different from how we view time in the modern world today. In the modern world, we all live as if we have nothing but time. And while we would always like more time, we still assume it will always be there. It's usually only those who have had to face their own mortality through illness or an accident. Those view time differently, but the rest of us live with a sense of invulnerability, believing we will always have tomorrow. The average person has about 27,000 tomorrows in a lifetime. So many it's really hard to count them. Tomorrow is always assumed. But Jesus was different. He knew enough about the world to live and teach as if there would be no tomorrow. His view of time was different. He believed, like every Jew, that this world will someday come to an end. The Greeks of his day thought differently about time. They believed that time was like a wheel that keeps on turning and repeating itself over and again without end. Like that old Steve Miller Band song from the 1970s, time keeps on slipping, slipping, slipping into the future. For the Greeks, there was no end to time. But for the Hebrews, time wasn't a wheel, it was a straight line with a beginning and an end. God was the Alpha and Omega of history. All things have a beginning and an end. This idea of time is captured in that famous passage from Ecclesiastes, in which the writer says, there's a time for everything under heaven. And he speaks of all these moments in life that cover the spectrum of human experience. Mourning and dancing, making peace and making war, weeping and laughing, and the most definitive of all human experiences, a time to be born and a time to die. They all understood that nothing in life is static. Everything is changing. Everything is being birthed and undergoing death. Beginning and ending, coming and going. Nothing is permanent. So Jesus is walking the streets of Jerusalem one day when he notices that his disciples are awestruck by the beauty, the magnificence of the temple, this impressive structure built by human hands, consecrated to God, the symbol of all that is good and eternal in the world. It seems to them so permanent and strong and everlasting. The disciples are hillbillies from Galilee. They've probably never seen anything like this in the world. Teacher, they say, look at these huge stones, these beautiful buildings. And Jesus says, there will come a day when this temple will be no more. It will be destroyed. Not one stone will be left upon another. And the same is true of everything in this world, he suggests. There will be wars and earthquakes and famines. These are the signs, he says, that the end is near, that our tomorrows are running out. You probably know some Christians who love it when Jesus talks this way. They think Jesus is speaking about the future, predicting what will happen someday, so they read their Bibles in one hand and the newspaper in the other, looking for signs that the end of the world is near and Christ is returning. Rockets fly back and forth between Iran and Jerusalem. Unprecedented wildfires burn in California. Global pandemics strike, and floods and hurricanes and elections create chaos and uncertainty. And they say these are the signs of the apocalypse and Christ's return. But Jesus isn't talking here about the future. He's speaking about the precariousness of this present world. All this that you see, it's not as stable, he's saying. It's not as permanent as it may appear. All of this, for all its present beauty and glory, is ending. How did Willie Loman put it in The Death of a Salesman? I feel kind of temporary. We don't like this kind of thinking, and I know in a world of so much change and chaos and uncertainty, we need a sense of permanence to tell us that there's something in this world we can depend on. That's all going to be okay, that we're going to be okay. And Jesus says, there is nothing in this world you can ultimately depend on. Have you ever noticed how we love our monuments? Impressive edifices like the temple in Jerusalem, or the awesome limestone monuments in D.C., or the breathtaking cathedrals scattered across the globe, some as old as 1,000 years. They all seek to reassure us that In an ever-changing world, we can count on something to never change. That there's something permanent, stable, enduring over time. I remember visiting a colleague's church in Los Angeles, beautiful church designed by some architect in the Gothic revival style with massive stone pillars and pointed arches, flying buttresses. It looked hundreds of years old, like a real 12th century Gothic cathedral. But I knew I was in Los Angeles, which is only like maybe 9 years old. And the church, it turns out, was built in the 1930s. I thought, why would anyone build a 12th century style Gothic church in one of the glitziest, most superficial cities of the 20th century? I think it's because it says all of this will come and go, but here's a symbol of something enduring, unchanging, something you can count on. And we love that sense of permanence, but then Jesus comes and he says, no, it's all coming down. None of this lasts forever. It's all an illusion. Nothing in this world is permanent. And the disciples, like so many today, want to know when it will all come down. When is the apocalypse going to happen? And did you hear the shocking thing that Jesus says? He says it's already happening. Let me explain. The word apocalypse doesn't mean what you may have been led to believe. It doesn't mean the end of the world, the end times, the second coming. Apocalypse refers to a revealing or an uncovering. It literally means to unveil. An apocalypse isn't an end of the world cataclysmic event. It's an experience that reveals what's really going on behind the curtains of this world, behind the curtains of our lives. Every day our lives are filled with apocalyptic moments. Maybe it's an experience that peels away a part of your life that isn't working anymore so that you can see something about yourself that you never knew was there. Your first day at an AA meeting, your first day after the divorce was finalized, your first day of retirement, your first day of chemotherapy. Maybe it comes in the form of a sudden change in your life plans that unveils new possibilities for you. A job loss or a job offer, an oops baby, a bleak diagnosis, a cross-country move. Maybe it appears in the form of a challenging word spoken by someone who loves you deeply, giving you clarity or a kick in the pants, the courage to do what you already know you can and must do. Maybe it comes in the form of a dream in the middle of the night that startles you awake with a new revelation. These can all be apocalyptic experiences in which the curtain is drawn and you can see things differently as they really are. Not all of them are equal. Some of them are wonderful, some of them are terrifying. Some of them feel like a brand new start, some of them feel like the end of the world. Jesus reminds us that all things come to an end, even the most beautiful things like a temple. But in every ending is the promise of a new beginning. And that's why he called all of these apocalyptic events birth pangs, because something new was always about to be born. What is it? And what will we do about it? In her book, Bird by Bird, Anne Lamott wrote about watching her close friend die of cancer. And she wrote about the advice that her friend gave her, a mutual friend gave her about that experience. Her friend said to her, "Watch your friend carefully right now, because she is teaching you how to live." And Lamott said she would remind herself of this whenever she couldn't get any work done, to live as if I'm dying, she said, because To live as if we are dying gives us a chance to experience some real presence. Birth pangs. Jesus points to the temple because we tend to rely on whatever we think will always be here. And so we put off the important things for later. We ignore the birth pangs. We're afraid of the labor. Maybe we're estranged from someone, but we say, well, we'll reconcile later. Or we're running so hard and fast and we're so exhausted, but we tell ourselves we'll slow down and rest later. We're too busy to attend to our spiritual life, to our faith, but we'll get to it later. We'll give more time to our families later. We'll be more generous with the causes that we care about later. After we finish all the urgent things we're doing now, all the impermanent things that will not last, we think we'll finally get to the important things later. Those enduring things will never be birthed if we don't show up for the labor, if we're unwilling to bear the birth pangs. The contemporary Buddhist teacher Katagiri once described life as a, quote, a dangerous situation. And what he meant is that it's the frailty of life that makes it so precious. He said the china bowl is beautiful because sooner or later it will break. The life of the bowl is always existing in a dangerous situation. We are the china bowl, all of this, everything. It's a precarious thing. Maybe what Jesus is saying is that we can love the beautiful things for what they are, like the temple and all these earthly creations that take our breath away. Love and loss are intimate, inseparable companions. And by knowing what things will not last forever, we can choose to love them loosely and then give ourselves more fully to what is everlasting. Because if we love these things and cling to them too much, putting our whole trust in them, then when the inevitable apocalypses come to us and the curtain is drawn, what will be revealed about us? About what we gave our lives to? About what we really loved and what we lived for? Our takeaways for today: count your days that you may gain a heart of wisdom. In every ending is the promise of a new beginning. Knowing what things are impermanent allows us to love them loosely so that we can give ourselves to what is everlasting.